Imagine for a moment that the power goes out tomorrow morning. Not for an hour, for a week, 2 weeks. Every grocery store in town loses its cold cases. The freezer down in your basement, full of the meat you spent good money on, slowly turns warm. The bacon, the chicken, the ground beef, the pork chops, all of it on the slow road to ruin, and you have no way on earth to stop it. Now imagine the same thing happening out in my barn. My grandfather's smokehouse is still standing behind the milk house. The crocks in our cellar are full of meat my wife Esther put up last fall. There is a ham hanging from the rafter, dry and dark, that has hung there since November. The cold weather is doing some of the work, and the salt is doing some of it, and the smoke is doing some of it, and the lard is doing some of it. Not one of those methods needs a single wire from the power company. Not one of them was invented in my lifetime. And if the lights go out tomorrow, my family will eat just the same as we have eaten for 200 years in this same county. My name is Elias Yoder. I am Amish, and I farm here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My family has been butchering and putting up meat without a refrigerator since long before refrigerators existed. Today I want to walk you through the methods we still use, the very same methods you can use, whether you live on a farm or in a townhouse, whether you are a hunter putting up venison, or a thrifty homemaker doing right by a good sale on a pork shoulder. These are not survival tricks. These are everyday methods, and they make meat that tastes better than anything you ever pulled out of a freezer. But I am going to be honest with you before we take a single step, because this is the most important, honest word I will say in the whole video. Curing meat at home is real work, with real consequences if you do it wrong. There is a thing called botulism, a poisoning so serious that careless home curing has killed people all through history, and I will not have you on that list. So I'm going to show you the safe methods, in the safe order, with the safe ratios. And the rule for everyone listening, especially the beginner, is the same. Start simple. Follow a tested recipe. Respect the work. Jerky and smoked sausage are forgiving. A whole country ham or a jar of pressure canned meat is far less forgiving. Walk before you run. With that said, let me take you through it. Stay with me. The first method, and the oldest, is salt. Salt is the grandfather of all meat preservation. Long before there was ice in the icebox, and certainly long before there was a fridge in the kitchen, every people that ever raised animals worked out that salt would keep meat. The Romans paid their soldiers in salt. The very word salary comes from the Latin word for salt money. Salt was once worth more than gold in some corners of the world, and every old farmhouse in this county once had a salt box on the wall and a barrel of cured meat down in the cellar, because that is what carried a family through the winter. The why of it is plain chemistry, and once you understand it, you understand all the rest. Bacteria, the little creatures that spoil meat. They need water in the meat to live. They cannot live in a dry place. And salt is what you might call thirsty. When you rub salt onto a cut of meat, the salt pulls the water right out of the meat. The meat dries, the bacteria starve, the meat keeps. Now here is the part the old books are plain about and the internet is often vague on. So I want to give you the real number. For a dry salt cure, you use about 2.5% salt by the weight of the meat. That is the figure. Most home cures land somewhere between 2 and 3%. So for every pound of meat, about 450 grams, you weigh out roughly 11 grams of salt, which is about 2 teaspoons. A 5-pound pork belly takes about 3 or 4 tablespoons of salt to cure right. You can add a little sugar, 0.5% to 1%, to soften the harshness of the salt and let the flavor come through. You rub that salt mix evenly over every surface of the meat, every nook and every fold. Then you set it in a cool place between 36 and 40 degrees, which is about as cool as a good root cellar runs, and you let the salt do its slow work. A small cut, a few days. A bigger cut, a few weeks. A whole ham, several weeks to several months. The method is slow. That slowness is exactly why it works. There is one more honest word here, and it is important. For the longer cures, especially whole muscle meats like hams that hang and dry, the safe methods call for something called curing salt, what folks know as Prague powder number 1, or tender quick. It is salt mixed with a tiny dose of sodium nitrite, and that tiny dose is what stops the bacterium that causes botulism. Plain salt alone is enough for short cures and quick jerky, but for anything that hangs a long while or smokes low and cold, the curing salt is what makes it truly safe. The old butchers knew this in their bones. The modern science just put a name to it. Use a tested recipe, use the right curing salt at the right amount, and the danger goes away. That is salt, the oldest method and the foundation of every method that follows. The second method is smoke. After the salt has done its work, the smokehouse does the rest. Walk behind nearly any old Amish farm and you will find a small wooden building, dark inside, with a tin roof and a low door. That is the smokehouse. Inside it, year after year, hang the hams and the bacons and the sausages of the family. Smoke does 3 things at once. First, it dries the meat further, and as I told you, dry meat does not spoil. Second, it leaves a coating of natural compounds on the surface that are not friendly to bacteria. And third, the one everybody remembers, it gives the meat that deep, savory flavor no oven and no machine can ever quite match. There are 2 kinds of smoking, and you should know the difference. Cold smoking is done below about 90 degrees. Just smoke, very little heat. That is what makes a true smoked ham, or a country sausage that hangs for months. Hot smoking is between about 160 and 225 degrees. That is what cooks the meat through as it smokes, the way ribs and brisket are done. Cold smoking must have a proper salt cure first, because that temperature sits right in the danger zone for bacteria. Hot smoking cooks as it goes. Both have their place. And the wood matters. The old folks used hickory for the deep smoky flavor, and that is the king of the smoke woods in this country. Apple wood for a sweeter, milder smoke, often on poultry and pork. Maple, oak, pecan, all good. But never use pine or any soft, sappy wood. The sap and the resin will ruin the meat and can make you sick. A few good chunks of hardwood, a small, smoldering fire, slow, steady smoke for hours or for days, depending on what you are smoking. That is the whole of the craft, and a properly salt-cured, properly smoked country ham, hung in a dry, cool place, can keep for many months, sometimes longer than a year. Months without a single watt of power. The third method is sugar, and I say that knowing how strange it sounds. Sugar by itself does not preserve meat, but sugar, together with salt, makes a softer, sweeter cure, and that is what gives you a proper old-fashioned sugar-cured ham or sugar-cured bacon, the kind of breakfast meat that tastes like Sunday morning at my grandmother's table. The recipe is salt plus brown sugar, sometimes a little molasses or honey, sometimes a few spices, black pepper and bay. The same 2 to 3% salt plus a half to 1% sugar by weight, rubbed onto the meat and cured just the same as a plain salt cure. The sugar softens the harsh edge of the salt, and the flavor that comes out of it is sweet and savory at once. Now here is what nobody tells you about a sugar cure. The sugar feeds the good, slow fermentation that happens in a properly cured meat. The bad bacteria stay starved on the salt, while the good ferments do a small, quiet work that gives old cured meat its depth. That is the why behind the wonder. Folks who taste a true sugar-cured ham for the first time will ask, "What on earth is in this?" And the honest answer is just salt and sugar and time. The fourth method is vinegar. Plain white vinegar or apple cider vinegar makes a brine that bacteria cannot live in because the acid is simply too sour for them. So when you take a sausage or a fish or a piece of pickled pork and put it into a vinegar brine with spices, the vinegar does what the salt does in a salt cure. It makes the meat hostile to spoilage and gives it that bright, pickled flavor folks either love outright or have to learn to love. This is the method behind pickled herring, pickled sausage, pickled pig's feet, the kind of jar that once sat on the counter of every country store. The brine is vinegar, a little salt, a little sugar, and whatever spices belong with what you are pickling. The meat goes in cooked or raw, depending on the recipe. The jar is sealed, and the meat keeps in a cool place for weeks, sometimes months. A small honest word here. Vinegar is less protective than a full salt cure or pressure canning. So vinegar brine meats are best kept in a cold pantry or a refrigerator if you have one, and eaten within their proper time. It is wonderful for a few weeks. It is not a way to make a piece of meat shelf stable for a year. Know what each method does and use it for exactly that. The fifth method is lard, and this one surprises folks. The old French called it confit. The plain English farm version is potted meat, or meat kept in lard. The idea is this. You cook a piece of meat slowly, then you sink it completely down into melted rendered fat, lard in our case, from the same pig you butchered, and you let the fat cool and harden around it. That hardened lard makes a perfect airtight seal. No air, no bacteria. The meat sits in its own cool, fat-sealed crock for months in the cellar. When you want it, you scoop a piece out of the lard, warm it gently, and eat it. And the meat that comes out is tender, rich, and unspoiled. The lard itself you save and cook with. Nothing wasted ever. This works best with the richer meats. Duck legs, goose, pork shoulder, and sausage. It is one of the oldest methods in all of farm cooking, used long before any refrigerator existed in any farmhouse in this country. The sixth method is the root cellar. Now, the cellar is not itself a curing method, but it is the home of every curing method. A proper root cellar, a stone-walled or earth-bermed space dug into the ground or built into a hillside, stays naturally cool and steady all year round, summer and winter, holding a temperature not far off a refrigerator, kept by the earth itself with no power, no compressor, and no bill. Inside the cellar hang the cured hams, the smoked sausages, the crocks of lard-sealed meat, the jars of pressure-canned beef, the barrels of brined pork. The cellar gives every method I have shown you a safe, cool, dark home. The constant cool slows what little spoilage chemistry remains. The dark keeps the light from doing it small harm, and the earth holds the temperature steady through every season. A good root cellar is the very heart of an old farm pantry, and every method I am showing you today works 10 times better when it has a proper, cool, dark cellar to live in. The seventh method is winter itself, and this one is the simplest of them all. When the temperature outside drops below freezing and stays there, as it does for months in a Pennsylvania winter, the whole of the outdoors becomes a freezer. The old farmers butchered their hogs in November and December for a reason. The cold did half the work of keeping the meat. A side of pork hung in a clean, unheated barn or smokehouse in January will keep for weeks with no other treatment at all, just from the cold. You wrap the meat in clean cloth, burlap, or muslin to keep the flies and the dust off it. You hang it somewhere that stays reliably cold, and you check it every day. Once the cold breaks in the spring, the meat must be salted, or smoked, or canned, or eaten. But through those cold months, the winter does the work for you. That is why butchering was always a winter chore in old farm life. Not because nobody got hungry in summer, but because winter was the season the meat could be handled and worked without spoiling. The whole rhythm of the farm year was built around what the weather would let a family do. The eighth method is drying, what most folks call jerky. You take lean meat, beef, venison, turkey, even chicken, cut it into thin strips, season it with salt and spices, and dry it slowly until nearly all the water is gone. Dry meat will not spoil. Dry meat keeps for months in a jar on the shelf. A pound of beef becomes a few ounces of jerky, light and tough, that you can carry in a pocket and eat out in the field. The honest safety word on jerky comes straight from the food safety folks at the Agriculture Department. The meat should reach an internal temperature of 160 degrees at some point in the process, either by a brief cook before drying or by the heat of the drying itself, to kill any bacteria in the raw meat. After that hot moment, you can dry it at a lower temperature, around 140, until it is dry and leathery. That is the modern science confirming what the old folks always did at their hearths. Start hot, finish dry. And for wild game and for pork, freeze the meat for a few weeks first before you make jerky of it. That kills any parasites that might be there. A small precaution, well worth taking. The result is the lightest, longest keeping meat there is. Months on a shelf, years if you seal it airtight or keep it cold. Real food, real protein, ready to eat any time. The ninth method, and the most modern of the old methods, is pressure canning. Now I will tell you plainly, pressure canning is not as old as the others. It came into wide farm use in the early 1900s, but it has been on Amish farms for as long as my own grandfather could remember, and it is the most reliable way there is to put up cooked meat for the long haul. The method: you cook the meat, pack it hot into clean glass jars, seal the jars, and set them in a pressure canner. Not a boiling water bath, a pressure canner, under high steam pressure for the time the recipe calls for. That high pressure raises the temperature inside the jars to about 240 degrees, hot enough to kill every bacterium and every spore, including the spores of the botulism bug. The jars seal as they cool, airtight, and the meat keeps on a pantry shelf for years. 3 to 5 years easily, stored cool. And the safety word here is the most important one in this whole video. You must use a pressure canner, not a water bath canner, for meat. And you must follow the tested times and pressures from a real source. The USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, your county extension office, the Ball Canning Book. Do not guess, do not shortcut. Improper canning of meat is one of the most common ways folks have poisoned themselves in this country. Done right, it is one of the safest and most useful things you can learn. Done wrong, it is dangerous. I would far rather you wait and learn it properly than try it from memory. But a jar of pressure canned beef on the pantry shelf is a thing of beauty. Open it, warm it in a pan with a little broth and some vegetables, and you have a hot meal in 15 minutes, 3 years after you canned it, with no power required. Now I want to take a moment, because this is the part that matters. Look at what we have just walked through. 9 methods, every one of them older than the refrigerator. Every one of them still used in working Amish households today, and in working farmhouses across this country and this world before ever the power lines went up. Salt, smoke, sugar, vinegar, lard, the root cellar, the winter cold, drying, and pressure canning. Together, in different combinations for different meats, these 9 will keep meat from spoiling for months, and some of them for years. And here is the quiet wonder of it. When you preserve meat this way, the meat does not merely keep, it gets better. A ham that is hung 6 months in a smokehouse is a finer ham than the one you first hung there. A jar of canned beef has a depth of flavor a fresh roast cannot touch. Sugar-cured bacon taste like nothing that ever came off a styrofoam tray at the store. These methods are not a compromise you settle for. These methods make the food. There is no money for the grocery industry in teaching folks any of this. There is no profit at all in a family that buys a side of pork one time and eats off it for a year. So the knowledge has quietly faded away. The cured ham at the store comes wrapped in plastic and full of chemical preservatives the old butchers would not even recognize. And most people no longer know there was ever another way. But there was, and there still is. And it works every bit as well today as it did in 1825. My grandfather butchered every fall and never once owned a refrigerator. My father did the same. I do the same. Esther runs the kitchen end of it the way her mother did, and my mother before that. The meat in our cellar right now would keep my family fed through a whole winter with no power, no grocery store, and no help from anyone. That is not survival living. That is just normal living, the way it was done in this country for 200 years before the electric companies ever came. And you can do the same. Not all at once. You start with the simple methods. Make jerky first. Learn to brine. Try a small salt-cured pork belly and make yourself some bacon. Get a pressure canner and learn it properly on simple things before you ever try it on meat. You build the skill year by year, recipe by recipe, until the day comes that you can stand in your own pantry and know that you can feed your family from your own two hands, with no wire running in from anywhere. So here is what I want you to do this week. Pick one of these 9 methods, the simplest one that calls to you. For most folks, I would say jerky, because it is the most forgiving and the safest place to begin. Buy a few pounds of lean beef or venison. Cut it into thin strips with the grain. Salt it and season it. Dry it in a low oven that hits 160 degrees in the first hour. Then finish it at 140 until it is dry and leathery, and store it in a jar in a cool place. Once you have done that, once you have eaten meat you preserved with your own hands, none of the rest of these methods will feel strange to you anymore. Tell me down in the comments which of the 9 sounds like the one you would try first. Jerky, salt cure, smoke, lard storage, pressure canning. And if your grandmother or your grandfather kept a smokehouse or a cellar, tell me what you remember of it, because those memories are the very knowledge I am trying to keep alive on this channel. I read every single one. Next time, since we have spoken of putting meat up for the long winter, I'm going to show you the old way my people render lard from a side of pork. The slow heat, the cracklings, the storing of it, every step from the fat scraps to the jars of clean white lard on the cellar shelf. It is the natural next step after today. Until then, get yourself a good thermometer, get a good tested recipe, and start with the easy ones. The old folks did not learn all of this at once, and neither will you. But one method at a time, you will build the kind of pantry that the grocery store can never give you.